Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnei ka mihi ki te mana whenua o Aotearoa, and we acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Dotterel country in Queensland. Before we dive into our conversation today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And finally, if you enjoy this podcast, please like, share or comment on our social media and consider buying us a coffee to help support our work. Now, on with the show.
So back in season 2, we made a fantastic decision to provide our future scientists with a platform to share their research. We started with a series of episodes that invited honours and PhD students from a drift lab in Tasmania and have continued to do so ever since. Harrison featured in episode 43 of season 2 along with Lillian Stewart, and in this episode we now begin our next journey of inviting some of them back to update us on their publications and what they're currently up to.
That's right. So Harrison Talarico has now obviously finished and completed that project and has since jumped the ditch and is working as a field ranger with the Department of Conservation on Rakiura, Stewart Island, where he's monitoring both critically endangered and invasive species. There's also been a few very interesting stop-offs along the way, so there's a fair bit to catch up on today since we last spoke. Harrison, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be back, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome back. We're just talking offline. You're all rugged up, deep south. We've just had our first bit of snow in New Zealand. I've just come back from Wellington and it was pretty cold there, but you're feeling the bite there, aren't you?
Freezing down here. Yeah, we'll get into it a bit later, but I've just come from sort of the desert in central Australia, so it's it's quite the difference from the heat there to the cold here, but, you know, I'm adjusting slowly.
Yep. Now, because of course, we follow each other on social media, and it was just a couple of months ago I saw that, Stewart Island, okay, he must be on a little visit. And then a couple of weeks later, nope, I think he's there for a while. So, we definitely had to bring you back. But let's start off with a quick recap. Back 2 years ago, season 2, you were an honours graduate and your thesis at the time was, can acoustic indices reliably detect the migratory arrival of short-tailed shearwaters? Bit of a mouthful for me. Update us. How did that go and what's happened since?
I'm getting like flashbacks for you saying that. No, it was a great year. Obviously, honours year, speak to anyone doing their honours, it's quite a stressful and intensive year. The thing with the project was it was really good and it yielded some good results, but the indices themselves proved to be a little bit difficult in being able to determine the arrival of short-tailed shearwaters. In some instances they could, but it was only if those short-tailed shearwater vocalizations were in a vacuum, right? So things like wind and penguin vocalizations and other environmental variables really affect the performance of the index. So basically, I think probably the best thing to come out of my research was being able to devise a sort of wind filter to filter out these windy recordings, because that was the main environmental factor that messed with the index values. So I'm still in the process of publishing, and it's been a couple of years. And yeah, my supervisors are certainly a bit on my case about publishing it. Hopefully, watch this space. We'll get something out pretty soon. But it's most likely going to be centered around that wind filter. So hopefully, sort of future research that are using acoustic indices can implement this wind filter and lead to more sort of reliable results, I think, with index values and seabird vocalizations.
Oh, very cool. And I suppose we should also ask you for an update. At the time you were talking about not having a relaxing summer at all, but having a bit of work on a passion project in regards to building a recognizer for individual vocalizations. How did that go? Did that keep you busy over that summer?
Or is that still going?
No, it doesn't, I've spoken to I didn't really, in the way that I did it, it didn't work because it was just too many overlapping vocalizations. But there's a few people that are sort of working on it in the moment, at the moment, there's a PhD student at University of Tasmania that's sort of having a look at to see whether it's feasible as well and getting recommendations from people in the acoustic space, bioacoustic space. And it does seem like it's going to be a really long process. It's going to require like a lot of training data to be able to train this recognizer. So I'm sorry to say it hasn't really progressed much further than than it did a couple
Well, it
of years
sounded
ago.
pretty
But
complex, so fair enough.
yeah, it's just that, and we talked about it last time. It's just those overlapping vocalizations. So if you're using something like I'll use a New Zealand example. I don't know, like if you're looking for like a Southern New Zealand Dotterel, for instance, it's easy because it's easy to build a recognizer because it's just one sort of clear call with not really many other factors around it. So, there might be a bit of wind or whatever, but you still should be able to detect this one clear vocalization. But when it's short-tailed shearwaters, it's like, and seabirds in general, really, it's just like birds calling all over each other, and it's really hard to get a perfect sort of acoustic signature of that vocalization. So yeah, you can get one in isolation and try to build a recognizer off that. But when you're running through a recording with a whole host of other birds, it's going to be hard to match that one acoustic signature with the colony calling. So that's the challenge. But yeah, acoustic recognizers are used sort of pretty widespread in ecology at the moment, but more for woodland birds and than seabirds because of that constraint.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got like 18 million of them in Tasmania, it's going to be pretty hard to tease out just the one call, isn't it? But
yes,
I suppose
exactly.
Maybe take us a step back, just for anyone that hasn't caught that initial episode, as to why, like, what actually spurred the research in the first place in regards to the migratory patterns with the birds. What was changing there?
Yeah, so there was a lot of concern that short-tailed shearwaters, is a long-distance migratory seabird, they travel from the North Pacific Ocean up in the Bering Sea near sort of Alaska and Russia, and travel down to their colonies in Tasmania every to the onset of the breeding season, towards at the start of summer. But they're really reliable in their arrival date, so they'll arrive in the last week of September, sort of every year. But over the last few years, leading up to my study, they'd been observed arriving a bit later, and that was of concern, especially in places like Stewart Island and Phillip Island. They were, in some cases, they were up to 4 weeks late. So, but it's a little bit tricky to be able to, actually quantify that in a way that's sort of reliable and efficient. You can sort of, I guess, go to the colony and get a lot of people go to the colony every single night and see when these birds are arriving. But yeah, it's not really that efficient in terms of it requires a lot of resources, a lot of manpower to be able to do that. So I guess the idea for my honours would be, is there a way that we can automatically detect the birds arriving? And we decided that, the acoustic indices might be a good tool to do that. But yeah, like there was challenges in that the vocalizations were overlapping, and it was hard to sort of get a good, reliable arrival curve. But what we did found is it was actually pretty easy with these vocalizations to be able to say when the birds were there and when they weren't there. But it was just a matter of being able to fine tune that to link like the arrival of the birds with the curve of the acoustic distribution, if that makes sense. So it was like 100 birds might equal this amount of acoustic distribution in the environment. 600 birds might equal this amount. 2,000 birds might equal this amount, et cetera, et cetera. But we weren't able to fine scale that to, that sort of level. But we were able to determine when the birds were there and when they weren't there, which is still a useful tool in itself. So you might be able to get it within a few days when the birds arrive. But yeah, it needs a little bit more work to be able to refine that to the very day or the hour that the birds arrive because of these environmental factors like wind and penguin vocalizations and other things.
I think for non-academics, this gives a real sense of appreciation for what research is all about, because it's not something that, a couple of nights in the library and I've got some answers, or go to the field after a week, you've got some numbers, some stats, and there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of factors, it takes time. And as you've shown, 2 years on, and there's so many challenges and so on, and you've got to kind of adapt with that research. So I think, for a lot of our listeners, or any of our listeners that aren't in that aspect or aspiring to study and undertake further sort of more, lengthy research like thesis and so on, or patience, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of perseverance that goes with it.
I will give advice that it was a bit of a kerfuffle to start my honours through, no fault from anyone's, but we just had a bit of problems with permitting and other things. And this sort of project sort of came about, when we were already a couple of months through our honours. We thought, how are we going to, what's the way, how are we going to choose a different path? Because our project was meant to be something else, but we didn't have the permits to do it. So I think maybe if I was to give some advice, it would be, I don't know, pick a project that's for your honours that's not as like huge as the one I picked, because it ended up devising this whole new project, getting the permits for these projects, learning a whole new skill in acoustic monitoring. I think, for anyone getting in their honours, try and jump on a project that's already established, is my advice. And because you've got access to data, the project's already there, the permits are there, the funding's there, and you can just go and hit the ground running. I learned a lot of skills doing it my way, and I'm really proud with what me and the team achieved. But it was certainly stressful at times, and like you said, we're still sort of ironing out the kinks of the publication a couple of years on.
It's all about the reward.
Yeah.
I mean, acoustic skills, acoustic monitoring skills are sort of invaluable in ecology, and I'm so glad that I've got those hard skills now, and just being able to, just my organisation skills went crazy through the roof as well, and my coding skills and my people management skills, and I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a masochist or something, but I really loved the stress of honours, and like I loved being under the pump, and I sort of it really spurred me to sort of work really hard and produce something that I was quite proud of. So I haven't quite published yet, but sort of got first class honours for my work, and was able to get a scholarship through my honours as well. So it teaches you how to prioritize and organize yourself and write as well. Like my writing skills were developed pretty substantially over my honours, and that was from help from Jen, and Jen was amazing advice for that as well.
It sounds like you definitely had a lot of moving parts there, so you definitely like a challenge, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, though, you went from the reasonably cold shores of Tasmania basically to the middle of the desert in South Australia for your next little gig. Little bit of a change up in scenery there. So tell us about your internship and work with the not-for-profit Arid Recovery.
Yeah, so I sort of towards the end of my honours, Arid Recovery every year, along with other NGOs like AWC, they release a round of internships. So you can apply for internships towards the end of the year. I think it's towards the end of September they opened. So I applied for the internship with Arid Recovery and was lucky enough to secure it, which was really exciting. So they get a fair few applications and offer 2 a year. So I signed up for the January Feb start. Within like a couple of weeks of being there, they sort of asked if their intern pulled out for the second part of the year. Intern pulled out, and they asked if I could stick around. So got hired as sort of like I suppose kind of like a jack of all trades. I suppose I was a casual, helping the ecologist and helping the conservation land manager, and also helping for the visitors, not the visitor centre, but like the social side of things, like the science communication side of things, with the visitor centre team, and ended up staying from Feb till, when did I leave? It's November. So ended up being the best part of 8-9 months, and absolutely loved it. It was totally different work. It was, I kind of miss seabirds when I was there. It was largely mammal focused. So I had experience handling seabirds and had experience, with managing seabird data, but hadn't really dealt with mammals that extensively. So it was really great to be able to hold sort of bilbies and bettongs and quolls and process them and do some really cool science. I should explain what Arid Recovery is. Arid Recovery is a not-for-profit NGO, and they're a fence reserve. So it's a 123-kilometre fence reserve, with the aim of keeping feral pests out. So aim of keeping cats, foxes, wild dogs, rabbits out as well. And they basically got like sort of a floppy top design, so to stop these things climbing over and digging under. It was established in 1996. Once they cleared out all the rabbits, starting off with rabbits first, they made use of the Khaleesi virus that came through and dropped the density of rabbits. So they got rid of the rabbits in an area and eventually expanded over the course of decades, and now it's what it is today. So it's an amazing place where native threatened mammals can thrive. Australia is shocking for mammal extinction, and many of the small mammals are under serious risk of becoming endangered and going extinct. So it's a safe haven for these small native mammals, but also it works as a research facility. There's different sort of sections of the reserve that are sectioned off with different fences. So which allows for a bit of experimental control and certain amounts of experimental control. So for instance, one section of the reserve might have bilbies, bettongs, bandicoots, and quolls. And so the quoll is like a native predator in there. And then another section might have all those bilbies, bettongs, bandicoots, but no quolls. So in that way, you can test the effects of, okay, what will having no cats and no foxes do when there's no native predator present compared to a native predator present. So it's a bunch of different things like that really, strengthens the experimental control that the area recovery can do. And they're producing some amazing science. They're sort of trailblazers in their field.
So from island to the desert, South Australia, and then I see you sort of making your way over to Rakiura, Stewart Island, which is the southernmost point of, well, technicality, there's a couple other little islands, but really southernmost point of New Zealand, effectively, working with or for the Department of Conservation. How did that come about? Why did you come here and to Stewart Island of all places?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I'd sort of missed, I don't know, like the temperate kind of climate of Tassie maybe a little bit. Yeah, it's it's very different to Tassie in terms of the vegetation, although the west of Tassie is similar to some of the vegetation here. But it sort of like reminded me of it in that it was just off the mainland of New Zealand. And yeah, it's sort of like, in the eye test, it kind of like reminded me of it a little bit looking at a map. And I think to be honest, my sort of ultimate goal is to, in some years' time or whatever, in some years' time, is to get down as far south as I kind of can go. And, working on the subantarctics is a real dream of mine. So I think this is potentially maybe like a good stepping stone to be able to do that, especially working with Doc. There seems to be, in a few years down the track, obviously, there seems to be some opportunities to be able to do that. And sort of working on an offshore island in, 48 degrees latitude is maybe good preparation for that if I do get the opportunity a little bit further down the track. But and that was my line of thinking when I sort of first got the job and applied for the job. I sort of just saw it randomly on the Department of Conservation website. But when I applied for it and interviewed for it, it really the project really excited me. And the ability for me to sort of, I guess, make a difference, really excited me. So the Southern New Zealand Dotterel, it's where I'm working on the Southern New Zealand Dotterel recovery team as a field ranger. And basically the Southern New Zealand Dotterel is a subspecies of the New Zealand Dotterel. So there's two subspecies, the northern and the southern. And the northern are endangered. There's about 2,000 of the birds left. But the southern are really critically endangered. So with approximately 120, 130 or so birds left. So yeah, really critical time for the bird and really critical time for the recovery project. So it's this recovery team, the Southern New Zealand Dotterel recovery team, has sort of just been formulated. In previous times, it was just temporary staff that were working in the summer, largely just trapping cats, feral cats, which is the number one cause of the Southern New Zealand Dotterel decline. But now sort of a permanent team's been implemented, and it's really exciting in that it can we've got a lot of opportunity to sort of grow within the team and a lot of opportunity to help rescue this bird from near extinction. So it's a really exciting place to work, and the work itself is really rewarding. It's a lot of sort of tramping around and heading up to, because the Southern New Zealand Dotterel, unlike a lot of other shorebirds, they'll spend their breeding season up on the hilltops of Rakiura. So they're they're an alpine bird essentially. They'll breed up on the alpine tops, which is remarkable, and then spend the wintering period down on the sand flats around Mason Bay on the island and in Aotearoa Bay and in Invercargill. So it's when those birds are up nesting up on the tops is when they're vulnerable to feral cat predation. So what we're sort of doing is like managing the feral cats that are in the landscape, particularly around the Southern New Zealand Dotterel breeding sites. So we're doing a fair bit of cat trapping and a lot of monitoring as well on the tops to see, when the birds are there, how they're breeding, their breeding success. And recently now the birds are off the mountaintops and down on in the flats, and this is when we're doing a lot of bird banding. So all the newly recruited birds, we're trapping them and putting bands on them so we can monitor them throughout the years and test things like survivorship and among other things. So in a couple of weeks we've got the flock counts coming up, so then we'll know exactly how many birds we've lost this year, and we have lost a few birds this year. But yeah, we're hoping not too many. Yeah.
I should have just kicked off with a few quick little facts about Rakiura or Stewart Island, just for our listeners that are not familiar with it. It is generally in the top 10 of destinations in New Zealand to visit. It is absolutely stunning. It's approximately 30 kilometers south of the South Island. It is an island that's just full of secluded bays. There's a rainforest there as well, lots of stunning walking tracks, but also it's probably the highest density of kiwi birds as well. So there's the highest chance of seeing a kiwi bird is in Stewart Island. So it's definitely a visit, much recommended to go visit. Now, you started, because the next question I want to ask is, what is the difference between the northern and southern dotterels? And one of the things you've already mentioned is, if it is a difference, but I think it is because I've seen a lot of the northern dotterels here in the North Island. But you mentioned that the southern dotterel, they nest up in the cliffs or up high, whereas northern dotterel, from what I've seen, they nest on the beaches, which makes them super exposed because they're not even trying to hide anything, which makes them even more susceptible to predators and so on. So tell us a little bit about the difference between the two and talk about numbers as well, because when you say the southern dotterel is critical, we need to understand that that number is super critical in terms of how many there are.
Yeah, so the Southern New Zealand Dotterel is bigger, hardier to cope with the colds of Rakiura, the cold hilltops, and yeah, so that's sort of the main morphological difference in that they're a fair bit smaller. There are other sort of things like they've got they don't have bands but little sort of wings around the top of their sort of like chest there, and in the southerns they're a bit more pronounced than in the northerns. And yeah, like you said, and in behavior as well is a big thing. So, like you said, they'll nest. The northerns will nest on the beaches and in the dunes, whereas the southern on the hilltops. I think the reason for the recovery of the northerns compared to the southerns is access and ability to protect areas a little bit more, easier, because they're not sort of up in really remote areas, the remote areas of Rakiura. You can get people out there and you can fence off certain sections where there's birds breeding and birds nesting, and have a lot of people on it, a lot of citizen science on with the cause. Whereas here, it's we often will have to tramp 6 hours to get up to the nesting sites and stay up in a bivvy up the top of the hills to be able to sort of trap and protect these birds. And I think that's sort of a big constraint on their protection so far. Like you were saying, 120. 130, we don't have the exact figure for this year, but yeah, 120 to 130 birds is obviously really, really critical.
What's bizarre, though, is that Stewart Island is an isolated island, small human population on that island, you'd think would be easier to protect and eradicate pests. I initially actually thought it was a pest-free island, but clearly not. But, one would think it's a bit easier because the ones I see here in the North Island and especially around Auckland, even Waiheke Island, and sure, if they're nesting, there's community groups, but they don't fence it. They just mark the area out and say, just walk around here because there's a nest here. But that's not stopping dogs, that are, humans that are taking their dogs for a walk and dogs accidentally going and cracking an egg, or feral cats, possums, ferrets.
Hedgehogs. I was surprised to learn that hedgehogs are like the key pest on the North Island. Yeah, cute little things.
Yeah, so it's kind of the opposite because there's more access. It's more accessible. So it's kind of bizarre that it's actually, there are better numbers. And
it's an interesting one. I think maybe because trapping effort is greater as well. It's easier to trap and have more trapping nights, have traps out for longer periods of time and trap more cats, perhaps. And here, I think it's been sort of the numbers have sort of been dwindling since the 80s and 90s, and cats have always been a really big issue on the island. Cats have been on the island for since the early 1900s, and we've got a high density of kiwis, but we also have quite a high density of feral cats as well. So there's really not as well, particularly in years of we got a lot of rats as well, and in periods of really high rat numbers on the island that supports high densities of feral cats, and then that in turn really affects the Dotterels. But you're right in that it's funny that you've got more because we don't have hedgehogs. Oh, sorry, we do have some hedgehogs. We don't have stoats or weasels here, which are huge predators for ground nesting birds. But they are still very, very critically threatened, these Dotterels. And we're thinking as well that cats are a huge factor and the number one factor that are affecting the Dotterels. But it could be a host of other things that we're not actually sure about as well. And this is why it's quite exciting that this recovery team has started up, because we can start teasing apart these factors more and more. So there could be things like genetic bottleneck, because the population has crashed previously. In the 90s, it got down to about 30 or 40 birds, and then went back up to about 200, and now it's sort of crashed again. So it could be, we don't know for sure, but it could be something to do with a genetic bottleneck, diseases. A skewed sex ratio is another theory, where there's a lot of females in the population and not enough males. So feral cats is one factor certainly, but there could be a whole host of other factors that we're not really sure of, and that's going to require us to sort of adapt and as we get more and more new information, adapt and hopefully overcome and safeguard these birds into the future.
What are some of the shorter term and then longer term goals of the recovery plan? What are you hoping to achieve within the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a lot of we're establishing new trap lines at the moment, and putting out more traps and just getting more manpower and being able to sort of protect the birds during the breeding season is when they're the most vulnerable. But we're also sort of hoping for a bit of so research into these factors that I just mentioned before, so like sex ratio and genetic diversity and disease screening and things like that. But so ultimately,
someone's honours project.
100%, yeah. I mean, it would be great if we had the funding for that. It is actually a perfect honours project, really. I mean, I totally agree. If anyone out there, no, Otago University.
Hey, Jen, if you're listening.
But I guess, and Daniel, one of the team members is, and one of the other team members is really big on the advocacy side of thing and the advocacy side of the project. And that is hugely important, just getting people knowing about the bird, to know about the bird and find ways that they can protect it. And just, sort of not just accepting the fact that this bird, might just go extinct, and really fight for it. And Daniel's really passionate about that. And it's great to sort of have him on the team, really pushing for that. So I guess the goal is, and then it's increase the trapping success of feral cats around the Southern New Zealand Dotterel breeding populations is the first point of call. And then as the years progress, unpack the other factors that are affecting the Southern New Zealand Dotterel and put measures in place to sort of combat their decline. It's nothing that it's something that we don't really want to do in a captive breeding program, but certainly it's something we might have to talk about in the future if the bird numbers get too low. And it's just a good way to, if you can successfully breed these birds in captivity, increasing the genetic diversity of the population. So that plan isn't necessarily in place at the moment, but it's certainly something on the back of everyone's mind. If it does become dire, perhaps we can implement a plan for captive breeding. Mm.
And considering the island is such a tourist attraction, what do people need to be aware of in regards to human dotterel interactions, or is it really just not so much of an issue considering they are so isolated when they are nesting?
Yeah, while it's nesting, it's not too much of an issue. A couple of the breeding sites go within public tracks, but we found the public to be really supportive. And if they're looking for a dotterel, it's really thrilling for a few birders to see a Southern New Zealand dotterel, and we'll get a bit of citizen science in the summer months. Reporting back to see the birds that they've seen, how many birds they've seen, if there was any chicks on eggs. We haven't had really any issues at all with the public and Southern New Zealand dotterel and interacting with Southern New Zealand dotterels. There's actually one on the beach at Ringa Ringa. So we just Daniel put out with the Stewart Island news. It came out a couple of days ago. So Daniel put out just a little mention in there saying, make sure you're keeping your dogs on leads and don't sort of disturb the bird too much. But the public's good about that. Sense of ownership over the bird and their wildlife. They're usually pretty good.
Keep your cats inside.
Keep your cats inside. That's a big thing. But yeah, I mean, New Zealand's the restrictions for cat ownership in New Zealand are quite liberal compared to Australia. Australia's got some pretty good laws in terms of like local councils on how to keep when you need to keep your cats inside, and a lot of councils enforce that. New Zealand just isn't there yet, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, thankfully that's not the town cats really that are affecting the New Zealand dotterel population. It's the feral cats way in the bush. So yeah, but it is still a great mantra. Keep cats inside for sure.
And if we were to come across a dotterel that is, maybe this is a northern dotterel thing, but if we were to come across one that is pretending to be injured, dragging its wing, is that a thing as well with southern dotterel?
Yeah, it's funky, isn't it? You go up to a nest, and that's it kind of gives away their nest a little bit for like us. I think it's a good tactic, perhaps for other predators like cats maybe. Whereas a dotterel will, if you're approaching their nest, they'll try and draw you away from the nest by acting injured. So like you said, they'll drag their wing and sort of like scurry away from the nest. And sort of get you away from their eggs or chick. It's a really cool trait, hey?
So, I mean, a lot of the advice you've just given us in terms of dogs on leads, give the nest space, because we were saying earlier that, they're quite feisty. The northern dotterels are very feisty when you're coming near a nest and they're sort of eyeing you out, and they're kind of crab walking sideways, just keeping eye contact on you as you're walking past the nest. They're very protective.
Yeah.
But a lot of the advice you're giving is kind of applicable to most birds, right? I mean, it's the whole concept of giving space, being respectful, and keeping your all animals, in a safe manner. Whether it's away or just don't bring them to the outdoors. I mean, it's pretty generic, right?
Yeah, certainly, and it's no coincidence that ground nesting birds and the ones that are under threat the most, because they're nesting on the ground. They're so vulnerable to predation. So yeah, that is where that advice comes in. If you're in an area of sensitive bird breeding area, certainly keep your dogs on leads, keep your cats inside, be respectful. Yeah, nailed it.
Can we take a step back and just ask the awful question of what happens if we do lose the southern dotterel population? What impact would that have in the whole ecosystem on Stewart Island?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess it's how you value species. It would be a tragedy because it would just be another bird lost in New Zealand. And there's just so many birds that have gone extinct in New Zealand due to the cause of humans and feral species. So it would be a tragedy in that sense. It would also be really quite a risk for the northern population as well. So I guess the benefit of the southern population is that you could theoretically increase the genetic diversity of the northern population and the southern population by sort of interbreeding them. It's something that is a bit contentious, to be honest, because there's many people that consider Southern New Zealand Dotterels as its own distinct species, and in fact, I can't remember the body, but a world body considers Southern New Zealand Dotterels its own species, but New Zealand considers it a subspecies. So yeah, it would just sort of like, I guess it would just be losing just another such a unique and beautiful bird in a really unique and beautiful part of the world and part of New Zealand. And I think that would be quite a tragedy in terms of how they impact the ecosystem. Yeah, it's quite hard to know really until sort of maybe the bird's gone. Yeah, there might be an argument that they're quite good at like dispersing seeds because they'll often eat the berries that are on top of the hilltops, and yeah, and I'm sure they have other ecosystem. I'm sure they have other ecosystem function as well, but yeah, it'll be hard to know exactly what that is until they're gone.
Or yet another honours project. There
yes. Need a PhD project soon, maybe.
For sure. So, so what next? I mean, is there intention on crossing this research over to other bird species on the island? Is the Southern Dotterel the only species that's a problem in the sense of at risk? Are there other endangered species on that island that will potentially also need looking into, or is currently being looked into?
Yeah, there's a host of endangered birds on the island. I mean, it's the Southern New Zealand Dotterel is critically endangered, but in a lot of ways, Racura is a haven for wildlife that has been lost on the mainland. So the Stewart Island robin is here, and over Island we've got a pest-free islands just to the east of the mainland of Racura, and there you've got sort of birds that have been lost in a lot of other places. So saddlebacks, kakariki are here as well as in Over Island in great numbers. So it's the thing with sort of feral pest management is that the flow-on effects will be huge for all these other birds. And while we've got a much higher density of a lot of these birds here compared to the mainland, the numbers are still quite low, unfortunately. So yeah, so feral pest management will help these birds improve and their densities increase. And yeah, we'll be able to safeguard a lot of these species into the future. Potentially, even there is a plan in place for predator-free Racura. So it's a huge island, really. It's really quite a massive island. So it would be quite an enormous undertaking that's going to take upwards of 10 years or so. But if we can manage it, if they can manage it, it would be an unbelievable achievement. And yeah, it'll just you would see densities of these threatened bird species increase exponentially. With no rats and no possums and no cats on the island, yeah, it would be absolutely amazing for all the birds involved.
That's brilliant. It's a really exciting time to be involved in this project, and hopefully those goals are achieved.
For sure, it is a really exciting time to be involved in the project. Yeah, so we're chatting with I'm chatting with the Target Uni and about these bloods, and hopefully get some disease screening going soon. And yeah, it's we've got all these previous years worth of data, so it's fun that it's great that we finally got a permanent team in for this bird. And even though we had a drop off, it looks like we're going to have a drop off in numbers this year. The team didn't start until November, December. So we're going to hit the ground running sort of this year in this breeding season, and we're confident we can sort of turn this around for the bird soon.
Well, Australia and New Zealand both are hotspots globally for a lot of biodiversity loss. You've mentioned it. It's a lot to do with human intervention, a lot of pests. Well, we regard them as pests, and unfortunately some Australian native animals here as pests as well. But, it's a lot of introduction of species. Why do birds nest on the ground here in New Zealand? That's daft. Well, that's because we never had predators. So, a lot of that intervention over the last 100, if not 200 years, it's a very short period of time, and we've lost a lot. So it's really heartening to see some of these wonderful projects. There's a lot of aspirations in New Zealand of creating a lot of pest-free zones. There are a lot of pest-free areas, and we're seeing the positive impacts of that. So, but it's a lot of work. Like you say, it's incredible. Massive fences spanning hundreds of kilometers. You've got to make sure that it's sealed off completely. Harrison's been absolutely wonderful to catch up with you. 2 years on, you're doing amazing work.
Oh, thanks.
Who needs to publish a paper? You can still do amazing work without it.
Yeah, Jen, if you're listening.
No, we wish you And she probably will be. But look, we know it'll get published. It's not easy, but I believe they're more rewarding. You know, the challenges you've got to go through and the outcomes of these kind of papers are massive. So thank you for the amazing work that you do. Thank you for coming to New Zealand and doing some of the amazing work. We appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing where next.
Yeah.
Desert, island, Antarctica, who knows?
I'll
mean,
page you in from Antarctica in a couple of years. No.
Yeah, we'll do a live interview from there. Yeah.
It was great to chat with you guys as well.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Harrison. Thank you so much for coming back onto the show.
Cheers.
No worries. Good to be here, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.